Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a viewer replay, which I don't really get to do nearly often enough. With tanks it's easy, I don't really play much World Tanks myself these days, and so basically all of my tanks replays are viewer submissions. With warships however, well, I've got my own backlog of replays, and on top of that, now I'm a CC again, I also have all of the testing and preview ships as well. So fitting in viewer submissions gets a little bit trickier, but I have decided to do it today and I've sat down and watched a bunch of replays and I've picked out this one, which is going to be a pretty darn good game indeed. Now this is a fairly recent match, but it's not a current patch match. That's an awkward sentence. Well done. And so this is the pre-nerf Hindi, and I say pre-nerf, the nerf wasn't particularly huge. It got a reduced rate of fire, basically. It went from, I think, what, 9 seconds to 11. And the rune also got a nerf to, I think, also 11, although don't quote me on that, because I think the rune was 10 before. I think it was. Anyway, they basically both got a rate of fire nerf because Wargaming decided that their average damages across the servers were just a bit too good, because it's a strong ship. Most of the tier 10 cruisers can boast a pretty good range, although with the Worcester, the newest of them, if you're trying to use it at maximum range, the maximum possible range you can get on the Worcester with all the mods and upgrades, you're not really going to ever hit anything. But aside from that, the rest of them, all the heavy cruisers, you are going to be able to hit things from reasonably far away. In some cases, even to the point of being able to potentially outdo lower tier and even some same tier battleships, because it is possible to outfit your battleships so that they don't have literally all of the range. So it's got that, but it's also got that German armour, and arguably it's not as strong for its tier as the Hipper and the Eugen are. Because if they get to be top tier in a tier 8 game, that armour can be pretty damn effective. This thing, however, of course, is going to have to see Yamatos and Musashis. And, of course, the Hipper and the Eugen can as well, but this is always going to be in with at least some tier 10s, even if they aren't amongst them. It does, however, have a very good belt, and it has a very tough turtleback, or maybe tough's not the right word there. It's got turtleback armour is what I'm trying to say. And so that combination makes it surprisingly troll. It can be quite difficult to citadel one of these things, even if they're sailing along broadside, especially if you're in another heavy cruiser. And I've struggled to do it even with battleships sometimes, where there's a broadside Hindi at, like, you know, 10, 12 kilometres, whatever, and you blast them and expect to get a bunch of citadels, which you would almost certainly get with, you know, a Minotaur or gosh, what's the French tier 10 cruiser? I've forgotten. How could I forget that? The Henri. There we go. But not with this thing. It is far from guaranteed. It's a bit like the Cleveland, the old Cleveland at tier 6, where the armour scheme could sometimes save it from taking much more of a beating than other cruisers would have in the same situation. So they've taken down that Conqueror, and Schwartz was focusing the Conqueror even as the much closer Roma was coming into view. Because, of course, the Conqueror, even if you let it get away with just a little bit of health, later on it's going to come back with much more. So that was an important early kill. He didn't have much success with the couple of AP salvos he tried against it, however. At this range, though, against a Roma, yeah, German AP, German 8-inch AP is very, very nice. And of course, with it being a cruiser, it doesn't struggle with the same dispersion that the Grosser Kurfürst ahead of him is going to have to put up with. So it's got multiple advantages, and although it doesn't always work out at the longer ranges against battleships, it can still be quite effective, and you would maybe use this at longer ranges, the AP shells rather, at longer ranges than you would with other cruisers of its tier. So they're going to cap A, And as of yet, nobody's capped B, but the enemy team is now in the process of capping C. And it looks like that's where most of the enemy team has gravitated towards, is that north end of the map. There's also a rather unfortunate Gascoigne up there that is all that remains of the Allied team that was up there, but they're not going to last that much longer, not with that amount of firepower coming down on their heads. So this is one of those games where we've ended up with blobs forming, essentially, although the blob of friendly ships hasn't exactly formed yet. But this is not a bad scenario. I mean, if they can blob up in the middle and take and hold that B cap, this actually might work out quite well for them. But it also might be quite bruising because, well, both teams have basically lost an equal number of ships so far. In fact, they've lost one more ship, and they've lost all of their destroyers, whereas the enemy team still has 2 left. Well, that was a well-timed frog in the throat just there. So, what they want to do is take and hold B and beat the enemy team as they're doing it, because taking the cap is, you know, one thing that I think they can fairly easily do, but defending the cap against the enemy team pressing down on them from the north, that might be a whole other matter. So there's one of the enemy destroyers, the Kiev, who is very low health. Definitely not so much a threat. The other remaining destroyer might be, though. It's a Shimakaze. And that's where one of the other nice features of this ship will come in quite useful, the German Hydro. Not quite as long range as a radar, of course, but Hydro has the advantage of not just seeing surface ships, it can also pick up torpedoes. So for now he's just trying to stick fires on various targets. There are still some reasonably healthy battleships around the place. And although this, of course, is German HE and it doesn't quite have the fire chance of, say, a Zhao or an Henri, it's still got enough of a rate of fire, and it's still got enough of a fire chance that you can set a reasonable number of fires and you can rack up a reasonable amount of fire damage. So it's not like I'm trying to think of any equivalent. It's not like the lower tiers, say, where there are times when the HE just doesn't feel like it's going to do a lot. Although, like a Nuremberg, for instance, a Nuremberg with IFHE is going to be much more effective than without, but you're not necessarily going to set huge numbers of fires based on the fire chance. It's more the volume of shells you can get with a Nuremberg. Maybe the York would be a better example, where at longer ranges you are just firing HE, but it's not necessarily a hugely efficient fire starter. So there's the Shima, picked up by Schwartz's Hydro. I am, by the way, throughout this, resisting the urge to make various Spaceballs references. I just want that publicly known. It's difficult, but somehow I'm managing it. Anyway, so yeah, he's used the Hydro to pick up this Shima, and at that point the Shima was pretty much screwed, although they did get their entire torp wave away, and I'm not sure if his ally in the Kurfürst took any, but if they did, they're going to be pretty beat up by this point. Talking of pretty beaten up, that low health Tirpitz is absolutely ripe for being picked off, and that salvo should do it. There we go. Even if it hadn't, he probably would have burned out there. It didn't look like he had a damage control available. So that's 3 kills picked up in a very short span of time, and that's also the 100,000 damage mark reached, which is not bad. Even in a tier 10 cruiser, getting 100k damage is pretty respectable. It's not spectacular, but it's certainly respectable. So while they're pressing forwards, they are also taking some casualties as they're going, but this is it pretty much. It's just the remains of both enemy teams bashing into each other, and they do have a Bismarck on their flank, but the main thrust is here. It's Schwartz's division and this North Carolina that's with them that also initially swung south much earlier on, and if they get to just pick off the enemy ships one by one, that's going to be great. But it just basically is this Bismarck that is alone right now. The rest of them are more grouped together. So unless the remains of the enemy team all massively fragment at once, this is definitely going to be a bit bruising. The good news is, though, that Schwartz is going into this with most of his health remaining and 3 heals left as well. So there's another kill for the Kraken, but in the process, the Grosser Kurfürst got focused down, so that's 1 less ally, and that thing can take a beating, but even the biggest, nastiest battleship can only take so much of a beating before it's going to sink. So of the enemy ships, well, it's 2 Hindenburgs, and I can't even see what the battleship is. A Friedrichsgrosser? No, that's not a Friedrichsgrosser. Oh, it's a Republic. There we go. Oh yes, the Republic's name, by the way, is rather good. Well, I quite liked that anyway. I don't know if that's a particular reference to something. Like, well, I mean, I'm guessing it's a reference to, oh, what's the... I've forgotten the name of the thing. The weird chimeric creature that has... Anyway. A griffin? Do I mean a griffin? I can't remember. Anyway, it's possibly just a reference to that, or it might be some specific reference. I don't know. But regardless, I found that name quite amusing. Anyway, that was an aside about nothing in particular. So yeah, it's 2 Zows, a Republic, not 2 Zows, 2 Hindenburgs, a Zow and a Republic. I'm just doing so well. This isn't even my first attempt. This is one of those days. This is one of those days. I managed to get, oh, I had a good one in one of the earlier takes. What was it? I got reasonably and regionally mixed up. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that happened. I don't know which neurons decided to so spectacularly misfire there, but yeah, I just thought I'd share that with you all. This is one of the more professional takes I've managed. This is definitely the best one so far. So anyway, yeah, there goes the Zow. There's still the 2 Hindis. The Republic is low health, and so that becomes a really important target right now. Although they are healing, and they've definitely gotten their speed boost active right now, because having popped out, they're going to manage to get back into reverse really very quickly. And so, although he's under fire from both the Republic and the Hindi, although he gets a nice bounce, well, not bounces exactly, but he mitigates some of the damage with his armour on his belt armour. Yeah, although he's quite severely under fire at the moment, he's able to finish off that Republic, and that just leaves these 2 Hindis. And at this point, they've pretty much won. Although it's close. It really is close. I mean, they've got the points advantage because they had 2/3 of the cap points, but in terms of the actual, you know, numbers of ships left, it's 4 versus 2. This has been a really, really bruising match. So kills his speed while he's turning in a bit to try and throw off that Hindi, who is reversing. Not sure why. Doesn't get that kill, but I mean, he's up to 7 now. If he gets another one, that'll be 8. That'll be 2/3 of the enemy team, which you don't get a medal for. And I've definitely said this before. I think it's weird that you don't get a medal for that, because you're doing well the tanks. If you get 10 kills, you get a Pools medal, which is, you know, also 2/3 of the enemy team. But with warships, there's nothing. So 8 feels like there should be something for that, because that's not easy to do. And yes, he's had 1 or 2 low health kills, but still, some of these he's worked pretty hard for. He's worked very hard for, in fact. So that final one is the 8th kill. They lost that Bismarck just before the end, but it didn't matter. 191,000 damage, along with a Confederate, a high caliber, and the Kraken. So, you know, not a bad result. And that was all enough to get him not far off 3,000 base XP. You know you've had a game when you're staring 3,000 in the face. You know you've had a very good game indeed. So, I don't think there's that much more to say about this one, really. It was, I think, a pretty good demonstration of what the Hindenburg can do. Schwartz was switching back and forth between the ammo types pretty much perfectly, I'd have said. I don't think there's many places, or really any places in that replay where I could have pointed to them using the wrong ammo, the inappropriate ammo for the target that was in front of them. So yeah, that was fairly textbook in a lot of ways. He was setting fires with HE and then at times switching to AP, and certainly, you know, broadside targets at AP, you are absolutely going to hammer them. So yeah, that was pretty good. The number of times you'll see people only using one ammo type, and it's especially painful in not destroyers, battleships. But it's especially painful when it's HE in battleships. It can sometimes really make a big difference in a game. So you have to think about it really in every type of ship that you're playing, and that's a good demonstration of why. So hopefully you have enjoyed this replay. If you have, you can do all the usual things under the video. You can, of course, sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.